I think we can start now. There's still people coming up with the elevator. That takes a while. I'm Willi Semmler, teach economics in the economics department and organize these climate research and climate talks at the SCEPA, the Schwarz Center of Economic Policy Analysis. And I want to welcome you all tonight. Welcome the audience here. People on live stream, there will be live streamed. You will be able to see this later. I also want to welcome, well, particularly our two speakers, Reiner Hoffmann and Satya Tripathi. I don't know if he's here already. Oh, he's there already. Okay, please come here to the front. Yes. I will introduce the speaker a little bit later, Reiner Hoffmann and Satya. And I want to say also very big welcome to the two deans. I have two deans here. Will Milberg is going to say something in a second, introductory remarks, and Joel Towers, as Dean of Parsons, will also make some introductory remarks, and then we will pass this on to Mr. David Gill. He's the Consul General of the German Consulate in New York. And with that, we will then go to the speaker tonight. I will introduce him later, Reiner Hoffmann, and we will have some comments from the co-speaker later from a different perspective. So, and my idea was then, well, there are several very well in Germany known journalists in the room, and I would give them a chance first to respond or to ask some critical and challenging questions. And then the two speakers can respond to this. And then we will go to the general audience and you can also ask further questions. So just one remark, the topic. The topic is climate change challenges to labor. Well, we had many climate events here on renewable energy, on EU policy of climate change, on the side effect of fossil fuel use on health. We had on the projects in the third world countries on how can they protect themselves from the coming climate change. But we thought now, well, the effect on labor and the response of labor is one of the most important ones, because labor is most affected, particular low-income groups, certain sectors, certain households, particularly in low-income countries, through disasters from climate change. But labor is also tremendously affected through the transition from, well, brown jobs to green jobs. And this transition produces or creates also a lot of cost for labor, and a lot of problems arise there. And Europe was one, in particular Germany, one of the early countries who had this transition initiated early. And I thought it might be wonderful to have some experience or report on some experience from particularly the first speaker, as you will see. So with that remark, I want to give now the floor to Dean Milberg, and then Joel Towers will say something.
Thank you, Willi. Well, I just want to take a minute. I'm the Dean of the New School for Social Research, which is the graduate division of social sciences, philosophy, and history at the New School. And welcome you to the New School for Social Research. Welcome to our speaker, Reiner Hoffmann. Welcome to German television, David Gill, the Consul General, Satya Tripathi. We have quite a stellar group. Ronald Shetkat, I'm happy to meet. Important German labor economist. So climate change and labor, what I call back to the future, which is that this was the issue when we first started talking about environmental remediation 25 years ago. The question was, is this incompatible with job growth? And is it incompatible with green politics? Today, we return to this issue again in a new form. And I'm very excited to hear the lecture tonight. It is a new form, though, today. And from my non-expert perspective, it seems impossible to imagine economic growth today without and employment growth without seriously addressing climate change and its potentially devastating impact. And again, sitting here in New York in the United States in 2018, we see Germany taking the lead on an important social issue, as they have on immigration, for example, in recent years. And so it's particularly great to have David Gill give some comments from the perspective of the German government. The New School for Social Research, for those who don't know, has very long-standing roots to Germany. Its origin in the 1930s, of course, was the university in exile of German Jewish refugees. And more recently, German refugees in New York have supported the New School for Social Research, and we lost one of the most important ones over the summer. His name was Henry Arnhold, and he was a trustee of the New School and a strong believer in two things that are relevant tonight. First of all, in remediation of addressing climate change and environmental problems, and his gifts not just to the New School, but to the Nature Conservancy, spoke to his real concern about long-term environmental change. And secondly, most importantly, from my perspective as dean, is in rebuilding building transatlantic bridges. In his case, in academia particularly, and having exchanges between his hometown in Dresden and the New School for Social Research, and having regular conversations between our scholars and scholars in Germany. And this is something that we value extremely highly at the New School. We have one of our former Hoist professors here, Malcolm Dunn, and this is a rotating professorship supported by the German government. The New School for Social Research has very, very close ties to Germany and continues to this day. The second piece I wanted to mention about transatlantic bridges is the expansion in recent years of the connections between social research and design. And we have at the New School one of the most important design schools in America, perhaps in the world, the Parsons School of Design. And they, of course, also have their own set of very well-developed transatlantic connections and design collaborations. So I'm really pleased that Joel Towers, the dean of the Parsons School of Design, is here to say a word of welcome, because the design component has kind of expanded the way the social scientists at the New School for Social Research think about climate change and think about the politics of climate change and think about creatively responding to climate change. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Joel to say a word of hello. Sorry for all the hellos, but I think it's important for everyone to meet the Dean of Parsons School of Design.
Thank you, Will.
Yep.
Thank you and good evening. I will be brief so that we can get to the main conversation tonight. Will has already made all of the welcomes, so I won't repeat those. I will just say briefly, I have two responsibilities here at the New School. One is the Dean of Parsons School of Design, and the other is as the director of the Tishman Environment and Design Center, an initiative that is now about 12, 13 years old that really intends to focus on the relationship between policy, science, and design in relationship to climate change. One of the ways that we think about climate change at the New School is as a design problem. And in the broadest sense of the term, it is, as a human-created condition, it is ultimately the outcome of perhaps bad design, but certainly something that we can understand as intentional, and therefore something that can be changed, something that can be designed differently. And so the implications, of course, and we'll talk about them tonight in regard to labor and to just transitions, are also design questions. They're not something that can be left to chance. It's certainly not something that should be left to status quo. It's not something that can be limited to the political realm. It is something that requires intentionality. It requires the capacity to think over a long-term period of time. It requires an understanding of systems and the implications associated. And so we see design in this very broad context. It's not just the making of product systems and services, but their relationship to the impact on the environment broadly, and that these are designed relationships. And then they can be understood through that lens. And so the relationship that Parsons has to the New School and to this subject matter is very deep. It is one that occupies many, many of our students who think about everything from the supply chain implications and materiality of fashion all the way up through the design of cities. And at the Tishman Center, we're focusing on it through the lens of just transitions. And so I think the conversation on labor will be a very important one as the disruption of supply chains and practices occur through climate, both the implications of it and the attempts to mitigate it, and very importantly, the adaptation that is critical to this immediate next period of time. And so design is at the core of all of those questions. And so I'm very pleased to be here tonight, always happy to be welcomed by Willi and the Schwartz Center, and quite interested to hear the conversation tonight. So welcome to the New School, and I think I'm handing it off to David. Yeah? Okay, to the Consul General, David Gill.
Consul General David Gill will be the next speaker, making some introductory remarks. I want to say something about David Gill. He was the head of the Office of the Federal President of Germany, and he is now the Consul General in New York. And in particular, I like his very broad perspective of, well, what is social change and what the role of unions is in this. And so, David, please make some remarks.
Thank you, Will, and good evening to all of you. It's a great pleasure to be with you at today's lecture. And I would like to thank the Schwartz Center for Economic Policy Analysis for organizing this event and for the invitation. I felt very honored when Professor Semmler asked me if I could give some introductory remarks for Reiner Hoffmann today. And I gladly agreed to do so because I greatly value the work of Reiner and the role he plays in the trade union movement as well as in the German society. And I'm happy to be able to say that my relationship with Reiner goes back quite a few years. Willi already mentioned it. Before I came to New York, I served as State Secretary and Chief of Staff for the Federal President of Germany. During this time, I got to know Reiner as a valued discussion partner, not only to the President, but to many other politicians as well, in questions of labor law, social partnership, future of work, and other union-related issues. He also accompanied the President several times on state visits abroad. On these trips, the Federal President always invites special guests and representatives to join him. And on many occasions, Reiner Hoffmann was one of them. The reason for repeated invitations was not only because we thought that he is a very nice guy, which of course he is, but was also because he provided us with such excellent advice on labor-related talking points with our hosts. Maybe even more important was that he represented, often together with a prominent representative of the business community, who was also in the delegation, the sophisticated social partnership between unions and employers' associations that seek compromises in the interest of the employers as well as of the employees. It's a system that we can be very proud of. The speaker of tonight is not only a very special person, but he holds a very unique and decisive office. Reiner is the president of the German Trade Unions Confederation, or short DGB. The DGB functions as the umbrella organization for 8 German trade unions. These 8 trade unions represent the interests of almost 6 million members. And of course, many more workers than just the members alone benefit from the union's efforts. Its members range from the Industrial Union, Construction, Agriculture, Environment, and the Industrial Union, Mining, Chemicals, Energy, to the Union for Education and Science and the Police Union. Together, they make the DGB by far the largest confederation of trade unions in Germany and one of the biggest national confederations of trade unions worldwide. But the DGB and its member unions do not only reach workforce agreements with the employers' associations. They have a much broader social and societal function. For decades, trade unions have contributed through their result-oriented policy and negotiation strategies to social equivalence and, yes, also to social peace in Germany. One of the foundations of this overall success is laid in our Constitution, which ensures the right to unionize in its Article 9. Only when employees can speak together with one voice will they be heard by their employers and have the actual chance to take part in decision-making. But this doesn't mean that there's only winning and losing when it comes to loan and labor negotiations. What makes the German system so impressive is the way both sides have been able to find compromises in these negotiations to maintain a balance of interests. Aside from German cars, this system is another true export hit, which was an additional reason the president liked to invite Reiner as representative of the German trade union on state visits. And international affairs always played a role in Reiner Hoffmann's professional life. In his earlier career, he worked for different trade union institutions in Brussels for more than 15 years. As you can see, he has ample experience when it comes to international labor issues, and therefore he is the right person to address future labor market challenges arising from climate change, a truly global issue. There's no way around a sustainable economy. Human beings have no future on this planet when we reach Earth's overshoot day every year already in August. The necessary steps towards a sustainable and climate-friendly economy are inevitable. Of course, they will affect the labor market. But instead of fighting them, we should see the opportunities that come along with that. I really look forward to our discussion today, and I'm happy that I can once again welcome Reiner Hoffmann abroad, this time in New York City. Welcome, Reiner. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil, for the nice introduction. Well, it doesn't leave me any space anymore for other introductory remarks. So I only want to say, in terms of bridge building, Reiner is also a very unique figure in that sense. He started as an apprentice in factories, worked as director for local unions, became the director of the European Research Institute on Unions, had a lot of international contacts and acquired a lot of academic discussions took place there. That's where I actually met him in earlier times. At the same time, he is rooted in the union movement and became now the most powerful boss of the German labor force. So, and to bridge this gap from labor to academics is often not so easy. Academics have some great ideas, but in practice it may be difficult for labor to follow them. But Reiner can bridge this gap. So that's my short introduction. And Reiner, welcome now to your talk. Yep.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, I think it's wonderful to see on a Friday evening so many people who obviously have interest in the topic of tonight, climate change and the challenges for labor. And after all what we heard and David said, I'm not quite sure that I can fulfill all the expectations you have mentioned, but I'll try to do my very best. And let's start probably with a few words concerning the DGB, as David has mentioned. No, it doesn't work. Probably very briefly the structure of what I'd like to talk about tonight. Firstly, what are the opportunities of transition? What are the situation and the current situation and the challenges? And I like to focus on the experiences we have made in Germany, and a few words then finally, what is a concept, what is the trade union concept of just transition? As David Gill said, the DGB, the Confederation of German Trade Unions, is an organization, an umbrella organization of 8 trade unions with approximately 6 million members. I don't like to go into detail about our internal structures, and would like to start with underlining some opportunities we see from a trade union perspective on just transition. The opportunity would be that a decrease in the dependency on fossil fuels and imports had positive effects for our climate. Environment and climate protection could be reached. And also we should take into consideration that with just transition we can strengthening the regional economic cycles, that with just transition we have space for innovation and for new sustainable jobs, and just transition finally would certainly improve our living conditions and would also contribute to prosperity of our societies. And let's have a brief look on the historical emissions. And here we can see from 1970 up to 2016, the CO2 emissions have increased significantly to more than 35 million tons a year. Germany is contributing to this CO2 emissions only by approximately 2%. China is one of the biggest emissionners with more than 10 million tons, and here in the United States, half of it, 5 million tons, is related to CO2 emissions in America. But it's more important to see a little bit more what are the emissions per capita. India, it's only 1.9 in comparison to United States, 15.6, or Germany, 9.5 million tons per capita. And what are the challenges? The challenges is mainly connected with what has been agreed in Paris, as the climate targets has been defined, and to reduce the emissions by 2050 to 0, and having steps for the forthcoming years to reduce it by 2020, 2030. I don't like to go into the details, but the most important aspect for us as a trade union was that we agree, finally, that there is no alternative if it comes to climate change, that we make any efforts to reach this low carbon future and to do this in a perspective which is also creating good and decent work. And if you look to the experiences in Germany, emission reduction by sectors over the next years, if you look to the energy sector, compare it with 1990 and 2014, we have still reduced in the energy sector CO2 emissions by 23%, and the objective is to 2030 to reduce it further down to 50%. And we made some significant progress in the industry. If you could see the figures for 1990 and 2014, we reduced it by 36%, but there is until 2030 a further step to be taken by another 22% of CO2 emissions. And also important, the building sector. Here we have made also significant progress between 1990 and 2014 by 43% reduction, but another 40% has to be reached until 2030. And the fourth sector, which is important if it comes to CO2 emissions, is the transport sector, where we have not made any big progress between 1990 and 2014. You can see on this picture, and there is still a challenge to reduce CO2 emissions in the transport sector of 40% until 2030. And if it comes to the development of renewable energies in Germany, you can see that we made some significant progress over the last 2 decades, or over the last 1.5 decades, if you compare the figures from 2000 to 2017. And if it comes to the share of renewable energies in the gross electricity consumption, we increased renewable energies from more than 6-7% to 36% in the year 2017. And if it comes to the gross final energy consumption, you can see there is not such a big progress as for the gross electricity consumption, but nevertheless, in comparison to 2000, we have a proportion of nearly 15%. What is important from a trade union aspect, if it comes also to the effects on the labor market, to have in mind that energy is one of the most important sources for our industries. And Germany, you can see on this picture, has still a significant share of industry if it comes to GDP. More than 26% is related, in the production of GDP, is still related to the industrial sector in Germany. And this is one of the reasons, by the way, why we have been more or less successful in managing the financial market crisis in 2007 and 2008, because we had a strong industry. And since the industry is depending very much on energy, therefore, as a trade union, we have a specific interest that this transition process will be a successful and a fairly shaped process. And in comparison here, you can see, for example, UK, which is one of the oldest industrialized countries. In the mid-90s, they still had a share of 22%, and this has been declined down to less than 15% in the year 2017. And what does it mean in Germany, the structural changes we have conducted over the last years in terms of employment? And you can see from this picture that this reduction in employment has been quite significant. Overall, we had in 1995 more than 400,000 employees. 180,000 employees have been belonging to the electricity supply. To the gas supply, it has been 44,000, and quite important for us, to coal mining and grafting, it has been more or less 96,000 employees in this sector. And if you look to 2016, coming from 96,000 to 6,000 or to 8,000, it is quite a significant loss in employment. And by the end of the year, on the 21st of December, we will close the last coal mining in the Ruhr area, and then we stop coal mining after a process of more than 150 years. And coal mining was one of the major success factors for the German industry. So this gives you only an idea about the situation in Germany, and if it comes to the coal mining industry, it is quite important for us how we have been able to manage this process, to have more or less 90,000 jobs less than in 1995 without any dismissal. And this has been organized, what we are calling social partnership, with an agreement between the employers, trade unions, and the government. But we have not only looked to make sure that there will be no dismissal of people, also we have made enormous efforts. What does it mean for the region, and what kind of new production we will be able to establish in the region to create also decent new jobs. And here we can see, in comparison with the old industry or with the coal mining industry, if it comes to renewable energy sector, that significant number of jobs have been created. Here you can see a comparison between 2000 in the wind energy. We started with 45,000 employees, and in 2016 we have increased the number of employment to more than 160,000. Less important, but still significant, the progress we have made in biomass. Starting in 2000 with 36,000 employees, we have nowadays more than 100,000. Less successful has been the development in the solar power industry, where we had in 2010 more than 150,000 jobs, but a sharp decline in comparison to 2016, from 150,000 down to less than 50,000, 45,000. This has to do with big competition we have been faced by China, and cheap solar power which has been produced there, and which the German solar industry was obviously not competitive in comparison to China at all. I don't go into detail for the hydropower and the geothermal energy industry, but what is important for us as a trade union, to compare the working conditions in the old industrialized sectors with the renewable energy sector. And here we are facing some significant problems and challenges, if it comes, for example, to the salary. The gross salary in the metal and electrical industry is approximately 3,500 euro. In the wind industry, people are earning only 80%, and in photovoltaic, only 67%. But earning less at the same time means in the renewable energy sector working longer. Longer working hours, less income. I think this is not the perspective what we have in mind if we talk about just transition. Because in this process, we have to try to make sure that we are able to create decent jobs with decent salaries and decent working conditions. And this is something we have been not able to realize in the renewable energy sector so far. And why is it so? This is mainly related that the industrial relations in Germany has been characterized by a decent social dialogue, and this social dialogue is mainly based on the capacity of social partners to negotiate collective agreements. But in the renewable energy sector, the new companies which have been established are not belonging to any employer organization, so it is extremely difficult to negotiate agreements with good salaries and with good working conditions and with good working time schemes. And here you can see that, for example, strategic personnel planning has been always the case in companies with collective agreements, and without collective agreements there is no personnel planning at all. So, to sum up, for trade unions, the concept of just transition will be one of the key success factors to make this transition process to a success for everyone. And it was based on the efforts we made as trade unions, especially with the International Trade Union Confederation in Brussels, that we anchored in the preamble of the Paris Agreement the concept of just transition. And just transition means that we have to be able to shape this process actively by certainly governments, by companies, but also by trade unions. And what we have to make sure is that those new jobs which will be created will be also covered by decent industrial relations, be able to have good working conditions and good salaries as well as good working time schemes. And that means also that we have to invest in such process of transition. And this is to some extent a contradiction we are facing in Germany, where the rate of investment has been, the public investment has been declined, and that we have to make significant efforts that we have, for example, sufficient investment in the transport sector with new forms of mobility, what we are calling e-mobility, that we have sufficient investment if it comes to housing, that we are able to reduce, for example, the cost and the energy consumption for heating, that we have to make a huge investment in establishing new renewable energy transport networks, that means intelligent grids, that we have to be able also to invest in the store of renewable energies, that we have to invest also in battery cells, which are important for renewable energies, because this is remembering the picture on the share of industry to GDP. If we like to safeguard our industrial production, especially energy intensified industries have to make sure that energy is being delivered not only if the sun shines and if the wind is blowing. We need sufficient energy 24 hours also to make sure that we will be successful in our industrial production in the future, which is also an important aspect for us to maintain decent work in the energy sector. And one experiences we made in Germany, which is important, all those processes will be successful only if workers have a word to say, if there is workers' involvement. And workers' involvement is organized in Germany based on the concept of co-determination. And co-determination means that we are not only looking for improvement of working conditions, not only looking to have decent salaries, decent wages. It has also to do that we are looking what kind of investment strategy companies are following, what kind of investments the companies are doing if it comes to further training and qualification, that people can adapt in this process of transition where we need new qualifications, and that those qualifications will be realized by further training and by lifelong learning. That means we have to strengthen the involvement of workers, to strengthen new forms of participation, and to strengthen our system of co-determination and workers' involvement. So I think from a trade union perspective, there can be no doubt that we have to make sure that we don't left people behind in this process of transition. And this is quite important because we need also the acceptance of workers, of citizens in this transition period. And if we cannot make sure that we take people with us, then we will make the experience that people are more or less will deny climate change. And if I can see it rightly, there are some forces and voices in the United States, they don't believe in climate change. And this is ridiculous. Because this is a challenge for all of us. At a dead planet, there is no work at all. So it is in our interest to have a successful strategy in managing this process. And in Germany, I can tell you, we have some regions where we are also faced with a new political movement, a far right-wing movement, which is called Alternative for Germany. But from a trade union perspective, there is no alternative at all, because we can't deny the necessity to address climate change with an ambitious concept of just transition in order to save our planet. But we have to make sure, again, from a trade union perspective, that we have to take people with us. And I have to look what kind of new workplaces we will be able to establish, to create, where people have then a decent income and a decent life. So to sum up, to make it short, the concept of just transition is not an easy one. As a trade unionist, I have to be able to bring different perspectives, different objectives together, and then have a real, frank debate how we can make sure that this transition process will become successful. That's not an easy way, but we can do it. And I gave you some figures, some examples, the experiences we made in Germany over the last 20 years. And I think, and I hope this will be also a reference point for other countries. We have to do it together, because no country, even not Germany, will be able to manage this process alone. I know that many people are looking to Germany. Some of the politicians in Germany are sometimes very ambitious. And I say, look, let's be ambitious, but also take into consideration that only 2% of the worldwide CO2 emissions are belonging to Germany. But we have to prove that this process can be successful, because then we could become a model of reference for others to do it together in a European manner, and, if possible, in a global manner. And therefore, I think it's also quite important to have this transatlantic dialogue, not only on labor relations, also on environmental challenges, because we have only this one world, and we should safeguard this world also for the future generations. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Reiner. It was a wonderful talk. We had somewhat planned also to get some response from American unions and politicians involved in climate change and union activities. It didn't quite work out, but you could see how, well, this could be some kind of example that Reiner presented here that could be discussed also in the US. And there is, in fact, in the US a coalition that's called the Blue-Green Alliance. I don't know if anybody of the coalition is here. I may later say some word. So there were some big efforts done under Obama administration already to help to involve the unions for a just transition process, and also to help to shape, so to speak, the transition from brown to green jobs. But maybe there are some people in the audience later who can respond to that, how that looks like in the US. But I mean, another aspect is, of course, a lot of small, low-income third world countries. And what the climate change theorists are telling us, well, they didn't cause much of the climate change. They are affected most and have the least capabilities to adapt to this. And so we thought we might invite somebody from the UN, and that's what we did, to respond from the perspective of third world countries or other rest of the world, so to speak, to Reiner's talk. And we have Satya Tripathi we managed to get him here. He is a development economist and lawyer, worked for 35 years for the UN, worked on Europe, Asia, Africa. He is involved in the discussion of sustainable development goals at the UN. You probably all know about this. And he is the assistant to the Secretary General and assistant head of UN Environment Program. So, and he's a very experienced, politician, economist of the other part of the world. And I think we're looking forward to hear some comments. So, would you like to come forward? Yeah, thank you for coming. Oops, I take your seat, and later you're going up to the podium.
Thank you, Professor Semmler. Mr. Hoffmann, thank you for a very enlightening lecture. I came, of course, to represent UN Environment's perspective in the conversation, but more importantly, to learn. Because I think the best professionals are those that learn all their lives, because that's the best way you contribute to the global conversation on anything that fascinates you or that tickles your fancy. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am Satya Tripathi. I work for the UN. I'm the Assistant Secretary General for UN Environment. I'm based out of New York. Just arrived on Monday, so very new on the job, but not new on the planet. Have been around for 55 years and understand the challenges of what Mr. Hoffmann was just talking about. And I'll present a counter view, not necessarily arguing against what Mr. Hoffmann has presented. I think it's very enlightening for the simple reason that it's great to hear from a trade union leader, especially the head of the trade unions in a country like Germany, who sees climate change as a real challenge not just to employment, to labor, but also to people and the country and the Committee of Nations. So thank you, sir. Very delighted to be in your company. The counter argument that I want to present is that if you look at the different employment sectors globally, the ones that come to our mind, the big ones, steel, automobiles, and off late, the services sector. Information technology, it's almost overtaken our lives in so many ways. If you add up all of that, it's about 24 million jobs worldwide. And if you add the ancillary jobs that they create, at the most ambitious number, it's 5 to 1. So you can say about 120 million jobs. But if you look at the agriculture sector, which is the big elephant in the room and is least talked about, is 1 billion jobs worldwide. And if you count all the people that live off them and everything else, that's the challenge we have to. And so you come across these false binaries that, by 2050, we have 9 billion people. How are we going to feed them? That's not the question to be asked. The question to be asked is, how do we raise the factor of productivity? Because the land is not going to increase, the population is going to increase. So in that sense, it's a binary, but a different one. So one of the experiments that UN Environment has done, we've set up, or we've been the catalyst in setting up 2 finance facilities in different parts of the world. The first one we set up is called the Tropical Landscapes Finance Facility in Indonesia, and the Sustainable India Finance Facility in India. Now, why do I mention that? Because if you look at the global GDP, the segment, the public sector segment is roughly about 30%. The private sector is about 70%. Depending on the country, it could be a little more or less, but that's the ballpark number. Now, why is that important? Because the whole climate conversation, whether you take 72 as your reference year, the World Conference on Sustainable Development, or 92 as your reference year, the UNFCCC conversations, we've been mired in a conversation around the public part of the whole equation, which is 30%. 30% is not going to solve a 100% problem. The private sector has either been just a disturbed neighbor that you talk to if there is a problem, or you talk to them because you can't avoid them. They're in the room and you got to talk to them. But they are the big part of the solution. Many a times, the argument presented is that, they're a bad company, should you be talking to them? But if the bad company is producing jillions of goods that are consumed by the society, and you are not talking to the bad company, you are irrelevant as an organization. That's the long and short of the equation that, as I see it, as UN Environment. And that's why we started talking to the Indonesia. We've done the first project, $350 million. It will bring back a degraded landscape of 88,000 hectares, which, by the way, is about 20% bigger than the size of Singapore, the whole of Singapore. And it brings back to life deforested land, produces natural rubber at almost twice the average at which Indonesia produces rubber now, and gets employment to about 50,000 people, direct and indirect, without the government of Indonesia putting in a single penny. It's all private finance and raised from the capital markets. What we're doing in India is even more fascinating. In the state of Andhra Pradesh, the chief minister there, who's a very, very transformative politician, if I may put it that, he really cares about his people, which is very difficult to find these days with politicians, because you never know which side of the conversation they are on. And so in this case, just to give you some background, it's generally said that out of every 4 IT experts in the world, 1 is from India. And in India, out of every 4 IT experts, 1 is from his state. So 25% of the IT experts from India are from a state that only has 4% of the population. And this is a revolution that was started by him 20 years ago. Now he's turned his side to natural farming. What is natural farming? This is not organic farming, because organic farming is substituting one form of fertilizer for another, just not a chemical fertilizer anymore. What they are doing is bioinoculation, which is regenerative agriculture. Fukuoka, those of you that have interest in the new regenerative form of agriculture, it started in Fukuoka and then, of course, spread to other parts of the world. What they're doing is something that completely avoids chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides. And they've already rolled it out to 350,000 farms. and they have 6 million farms in Andhra Pradesh with 8 million hectares of land. And the beauty of this whole thing is that it is all smallholders. So you improve the GDP of the poor, you improve prosperity at the grassroots, and we will be investing, we as in the Sustainable India Finance Facility, which is set up by UN Environment, BNP Paribas, and other partners, $2.3 billion over the next 5 years to help that transition to zero chemicals agriculture in a province of 54 million people. And why is it important? Because the input costs drop by 80%, and we have documented evidence that the output increases anywhere between 8 to 28%, depending on the crop. And of course, this is putting money where it matters. For those that are well-to-do, when you have more resources at your disposal, it perhaps gets into a portfolio account. Still does some help to the economy, but really doesn't do much for the population that lives on the margins of the society. And if we do not, this whole climate conversation has been about the wrong things, in my opinion. It has to be about lives and livelihoods. That's why the conversation about a just transition for labor is so important. Because if you cannot deal with or address the lives and livelihoods of people, whatever wonderful schemes you put in place are never going to work. Because people will find a way to survive. If they can't, then of course they don't. And in many cases, we've seen large-scale starvation deaths and all kinds of human catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. But if there is a way, people will actually adapt. And that's what we are seeing. And the other part of this equation is that India now spends $12 billion every year on fertilizer subsidies, of which it spends $1 billion in this particular state. So we're working with the government of India, and we told them that let's work together. We will get the money, raise it from the capital markets. The state government gets the money. They spend it to do the transition, which also means that they will not be using fertilizers anymore, which basically means you're going to save $1 billion in perpetuity in 5 years. But in the meanwhile, every year you're saving 20%, 40%, 60% in that. Add that up, that's about $3 billion. So it'll actually be cost neutral to the government of Andhra Pradesh. They get the $2.3 billion, they'll pay it back, but they're really not paying it back because they're paying it back from the subsidy savings. So that also addresses repurposing public expenditure. Otherwise, you're paying to destroy yourselves. So we're spending $12 billion in fertilizer subsidies in India to basically destroy the landscape, the ecosystems, the biodiversity, everything that you have, that you hold important to human existence and the existence of all the species. So I just wanted to present that as a counterpoint, that there are possibilities, there are ideas that we need to invest on, and blended finance is a great way. Now everybody talks about blended finance, where you marry public finance and private finance. Just to give you an example, UN Environment has spent about $500,000 in generating this investment of $350 million in Indonesia. That's the first project, and we're working on 20 other projects. The next one we're working on is a $700 million investment in a 170,000 hectare landscape. The point I'm trying to make is that it does not require a lot of money to get the right things done. You need to invest the right kind of resources in the right kind of ideas, and that can truly change the world in a transformative way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go to the table there. Yeah. So thank you very much for this very fascinating other perspective. We want to do a little trick now. There are several journalists in the room, and we want to have some provocative questions. We are all talking, so to speak, from our corner, from our perspective. And so we have here now Heike Buchter. Is she here? She's here. Okay. So we want to give some journalists some chance to, want to come closer here? Maybe. Then second, Johannes Hanno, who's she is from the German side. Then Johannes Hanno is here from a German TV station, the biggest one in Germany. Then we have somebody from The Nation, Andrea Lim, is she here? No. Then Sarah Sachs, is she here? Yes? No. Well, okay, at least we have two journalists and other can step in later. So we want to have some questions now from the journalists, because this is, so to speak, the transmission channel of what we think we do to the general public. These are the journalists. So, and they have to let us know, did we ask the right question and did we give some answer? So please, yeah, you want to come here to the front? Okay, you can go here.
Okay, so I go first, or?
Yeah, you go first.
Yeah, hi. My name is Heike Buchter. I work for Die Zeit. That's a German weekly. And yeah, I'm supposed to do the provocative questions that you might all have, but I basically try to channel that a little bit. Yeah, we listened to very interesting examples around the world, very different ones. I'm more familiar with the German examples, but I was wondering while I was listening to your remarks. I've been living here for 17 years in the United States, and maybe my perspective towards Germany shifted a little bit. I'm not quite sure. Yeah, if I would agree that, I mean, we all would love to have a just transition, right? That's what we all would love to achieve, right? Green and blue color going together, as Will pointed out. But I'm more than skeptical, because especially in this country, we've seen that there's quite a divide. And if I might say so, even in Germany, you encounter many, many people who are very skeptical about having jobs and green jobs. And you pointed out that green jobs might not be as good as the jobs that got lost in the process. While we are all kind of would love to have this, this vision of doing it all together and solving all those pesky issues like having good jobs and good pay and a great environment, I still see that there is a, sorry, I'm not crying for the environment, it's my contact lenses, a little piece of plastic. So I was wondering if this is a little bit of greenwashing on your part, if you forgive me. I mean, these have been examples from, before, but going forward, I mean, and what is the solution to not having the same pay rate, right? As you pointed out, that the new jobs are not as well paid, and that is because these jobs aren't unionized, even in Germany, where it is much easier than it would be here. So my question to you would be, why aren't they unionized? Why aren't all these environmentally friendly people who work in those environmentally friendly jobs clamoring for a union? And that would be my issue, that I don't see. We would all love to have this all solved in one setting, but I see that there is a lot of conflict, and maybe you can kind of respond to that a little bit.
Wait, is the response? We're getting another voice. Johannes, you want to say? Maybe you come to here. So please take notes. Questions coming.
So, hello, my name is Johannes Sarno. I'm the correspondent for ZDF German Television, which is, you can say, the biggest nationwide TV station. We have another one, it's called ARD, which is a conglomerate association of different local stations. And I'm the correspondent here in New York. So actually, I didn't come here to ask critical questions. I came here to inform myself, because it's a very important issue. And I was very thankful for your remarks. But then some question came to my mind. What you said, Mr. Hoffmann, isn't it a little bit old school, old time? It sounds very reasonable, but it's very focused on national capacity, what you can do in a nation. But as we see what's happening in a globalized world, this doesn't work if Germany does it by itself. There's competition with other countries. There is a growing, as you said, a growing population, 9 billion people by 2050 or so. So they will compete. They will compete for work. They will compete for a good life. They will consume. They will consume energy. They will consume products. They have to be fed. So even if we do, and you said it's 2% what we can contribute to the world, to the emissions, 2%. So even if we get more efficient with what we do, it wouldn't make any difference in the global scale, on the global scale. So what can we do to, let's put it the other way around. Do we need more solidarity, and how can you this explain to the workers, let's say in the US, in Germany, in France, who have to face that they might lose jobs or have to lose jobs to other countries where people need jobs, where people fight for jobs, where we have crisis, where we have starving, where we have to create, let's say, an economic environment in which they can grow. So don't we have to be, don't we need more solidarity with the others, and how can you explain this to the German labor force or to the US labor force? Because what we see in the US, what we see even in Germany rising with the AfD, the atmosphere becomes more anti-globalist. You know, even globalist is a bad word, becomes a bad word in the US and now in Europe as well. So how can we solve this problem without being more global in all concerns, not only in the financial markets, not only in the product movement of products, but also in labor rights, in environmental rights, and so on? It would be my question.
Thank you very much for the very nice question. There are one or two more journalists here. So, all right. Tell us from...
Yeah, my name is Robert Emmett Hernan. I'm published. Hello, can you hear me? Okay, sorry, my name is Robert Emmett Hernan. I'm a publisher of an online magazine called Irish Environment. And I wanted to ask you, I wasn't sure from the introduction from the Consul General whether in the DGB you include the trade unions associated with car manufacturers. If you do, I suppose, or if you don't, do you find a conflict between those trade unions and the rest of the trade unions on the push to form an alliance for climate change action? And if so, how are you trying to manage that conflict? Are you trying to talk union to unions, or is there some other function or medium for that? The second question was, you said because the unions in Germany have a broad remit with regard to their conditions, including investments, what investments the company makes, is there any push for divestment from fossil fuel companies within the German trade union movement?
I guess we have enough provocative questions now. So I think we should give you some time now to respond and pick up. Maybe we can go the first round with then more the soft questions. We will see. Okay, maybe we can do the first round of your response first. Yeah. So on the three journalists, the questions.
Yeah.
No, please, after you.
Thanks a lot for the questions, which I think are quite reasonable. But since I'm talking from a perspective as a trade unionist, I think there cannot be any doubt that we are really committed in all our efforts that if we are organizing this structural change, it's not only to take people with us, that we really have the duty to look for the quality of new jobs in this process. And we can certainly discuss what does it mean, the quality of jobs. Is it necessarily that the quality of jobs is only linked to a decent income? What is the relations between income and living conditions? So I think there are reasonable questions, but you have to take into consideration that trade unions, in difference to political parties, are member organizations. And as a member organization, I have always the challenge to deal and to handle different perspectives and conflicts, and how I can make sure that the conflict of interests will be transformed to some sort of innovative solutions. And I give you one example. I have been by myself very much surprised. As I have been responsible for 4 years in North Rhine-Westphalia for the chemical and industrial for the industrial sectors, and also for the coal mining. And dealing with conflict of interest, we organized meetings with the environmental movement and with industrial workers. First of all, we discussed what are the climate challenges. And surprisingly, they have been recognized by both, which is a precondition to deal with the conflict of interest, to have some common understanding what we are talking about. And then I had colleagues who have been working hard in the mining industry, and colleagues who are sitting there from the solar industry. And then there have been other colleagues with experiences from the automotive industry, because the automotive industry is to some extent quite energy intensive. And there has been a plant in the north of Germany where the workers have made proposals how to increase renewable energies for this plant in simply investing in solar cells on the roofs of this company. And the automotive company, UW, is not a small factory, so you have plenty of space for solar cells. The management disagreed to take such an investment, and what the workers did, they created a cooperative, and they took the investment themselves. And this was a big surprise for the people belonging to the alternative green movement, sitting together discussing with colleagues coming from the automotive industry. And then at the same time, I had colleagues from the coal industry on the table, and they said, look, we finish our production in 2 years' time, but this would be a wonderful alternative because we have plenty of space to invest in solar energy, and if necessarily, we will build up a workers' cooperative to invest in this. Is this old-fashioned? I don't think so. It's simply a question how I will be able to manage with different interests, how I will be able to manage with a conflict of interest, and to try to organize a process, to moderate a process which would lead then to some sort of innovative examples or good practice, I would say. And certainly we would be happy to create new and good jobs for everyone. Why not? Why not? But I shouldn't make the mistake to follow concepts which we haven't taken into question. And as you said, we are faced with an increase of competitiveness, which is not based on a nation state. Sure, this is the consequence of the ongoing process of globalization. But what kind of concept of competitiveness is behind? Is it competitiveness on prices? Is it competitiveness on high profits? Or is it a competitiveness on high quality and a competitiveness of innovation? And I would argue that this has to be taken into question, the traditional concept of competitiveness, because we are always blamed as a trade union movement. We are old-fashioned, we are the dinosaurs of the industrial society and old-fashioned. Maybe we are. But what we have to do is to organize such a process of transition which is not following simply concept of competitiveness which are simply one-sided and not reflecting really the new challenges. And what we are doing is really to try to deal with the challenges, because we didn't talk about, and all the questions, the remarks you made, about another important aspect, inequality. This will be the second big challenge we have to deal with in the forthcoming years. Because what we are facing now is an increase in equality driven by globalization, which is not healthy at all, and which is the reason why right-wing parties gaining ground. So, here again, we are committed and we are recognizing the challenge by climate change. But we have to organize it and we have to deal with it in a way that inequality will not be further on the rise, that we try to have a transition, a process of transition where we take the people with us and giving them perspectives, and this could take sometimes a little bit longer. And nobody asked me, but and in this room probably nobody really knows that we are in Germany in a situation where we just have established. If you have a problem, you establish a working group, and we have established a committee to deal exactly with this problem. When we will not only close the last coal mining, when we will be finishing all energy production based on fossil raw materials. And I can't give an answer in simply arguing we have to close down the last coal power station in 2020 or 2025. I like to be able to show to the people that we can handle it, even if it takes probably a little bit longer, but then it will be more, and here it's important word, it is sustainable. Sustainable for all. And that doesn't mean only social sustainability. Certainly it must be ecological sustainable. And here again, we have a conflict of interests. And what I can do is to try to make those conflicts transparent as possible, and then working on a decent solution. And all who are telling me then it would be wrong from a trade union perspective to make sure in this process that we have in Germany the working class people who are covered by collective agreements. This is what I like to ensure, because this is also, from a trade union perspective, the response to be able to that inequality is not further on the rise, and that the whole process will be acceptable for all and not only for few. It was a little bit general, but I hope I got it through.
Let's do another response and respond to some of the issues.
Yes, I think it's a very interesting conversation. It's a very interesting conversation from my perspective. I'm glad you brought up the inequity.
Yeah.
perspective, because most of the developing world, the Gini coefficient is rising. And the direct result in many countries is right-wing governments. Are they all bad? Well, I'm not here to pass judgment on any particular form of ideology, but that's for you to judge. But suffice it to say that they have very extreme views on whatever issues they put forward, to simplify a much more complex issue. In terms of, I don't hold any brief for Germany, but I've been working in the climate change field for a long time. But speaking from the world's perspective, I think Germany is one of the best countries in terms of what it says and what it does, and how it represents the cause globally in terms of climate change, environment. So thank you, Germany. Consul General, I want to take this opportunity to thank you. There's a lot of countries, and I've been in this business for a long time. There's a lot of countries that what they say and what they do doesn't add up. So in Germany's case, it adds up all the time. It's perhaps they're very predictable in that sense. So it's the same here as well. So maybe nothing special, that you are always predictable. So that's perhaps one of the reasons. But thank you for being predictable, because this whole conversation is so unpredictable that it's a breath of fresh air to have some predictability in terms of who's going to stand for the cause, who's going to support the cause, and what Germany does is support a universal cause. So I think that's very important to acknowledge, speaking for the United Nations. So coming back to the challenge of building a global consensus, the conversation has been mostly about who pays whom, whose responsibility it is. But the bottom line is that the next house is on fire. It doesn't matter whether it was my neighbor's fault that they left the gas open, or some bad wiring and whatever it is. I need to make sure that their house is protected as much as mine is, because I can't just protect mine without protecting theirs. So if I have the possibility to help them when their house is on fire, I think it helps all. I think that's an important point to make, which is almost lost in political or environmental or climate negotiations, because there are no domestic and international boundaries. There are no sovereign countries within whose boundaries the impacts of climate change stay limited. So it is a global problem. We have to have a global consensus and a global approach. There's much to learn in what is happening in Germany. And I say this with a lot of respect, because it's not easy. There are very few countries that have transitioned out of coal globally. Germany would be one of the first few countries actually to do that. One of the lessons we have learned working in India as part of the Sustainable India Finance Facility, we're actually working on a $6 billion project there. In North India, you have this serious air quality problem. I'll cite an example. My son was visiting Oslo. He was on a camping trip to Norway recently, and he sends me a message. He gets a health warning, that the PM 2.5 levels are at 50. You might feel serious discomfort. You need to protect yourself. And he sends with a haha. He says, I live in Delhi, and where the standard is 260 if everything goes good. Otherwise, it's 1,000. So these guys have no idea what the real world is, So he was being funny. But that also tells you what the reality is, So we are working on a project where North India produces about 45 million tons of lignocellulosic biomass. And the idea we borrowed from Germany, and the energy minister was in Germany last year, and so looked at, in every farm you go to in Germany, it's a people's movement. Every bit of biomass is processed, and they produce the natural gas. In some cases, used at the farm level itself. Some cases, it goes into the pipeline and then feeds the national grid. That's what we're trying to do in India. So there are lessons to be drawn from across national boundaries. There are solutions available. There are countries that have done it at scale. And if India could adopt that, and we're thinking about 1,000 such facilities across the landscape, which could process all the biomass, and we're looking at blended finance options. We're talking to different actors, and hopefully something will be announced on the 1st of October, actually. That's what they're planning. But I remember that because there's no need really to look for solutions within national boundaries. There are ideas that have been tried at scale, at system scale, in other countries, in other territories, in other jurisdictions. And if we share and if we learn from each other, I think there are solutions that can really help solve the problem. There are no problems that can. To give you an example, when I was born in the early 60s, the life expectancy in my country was about 40. I should be dead by now. Now it's 72. If you go to Korea, Korean women, it's somewhere around 90. By 2020, they'll reach a life expectancy of 90. That's the average. That means if 50% will die at 80, other 50% will live till 100. That's where we are. So things change, and things have changed for the better. So I have great faith in humanity and our ability to find the solutions. My biggest worry is, will we find it soon enough before we drop off? That's the big question. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, both of you. So I think we can go to the general audience. I just want to make one remark. There's an old a dinosaur still on the earth that is coal. The dinosaurs, to get out of this dinosaur as compared to oil or gas or other source of energy, it's very, very difficult, and there's a big resistance. Oh, there's a big resistance on getting out of coal. That not only in developing economies, but also in Germany. You know, there are studies from the DIW, for example, that there's a committee, yes, on coal, but well, I don't know when they're coming out with results. So in other words, there is, that was a particular question when we had invited Satya Tripathi to answer a little bit the question of, well, how do other countries transition out of coal? It is well known by scientists that this is the last reserve, so the biggest reserve in coal, is the biggest CO2 emission, and is used as a bridge now for moving to renewable energy. So there could be some big problems that are coming up. So, but this was just a quick comments on this last dinosaur there. Then there were some questions now on the more technical side. So you had some questions, and we will open this up. We will have 3 questions first, and then the speakers will answer, and then we can have another round of 3 questions. Yeah. So here was the first, and then the lady here. Yeah. But please be short, not that form. So for political movements. So
Hello. Thank you for speaking tonight. And I know the importance and significance of the concepts that you introduced to us tonight, but I would also like to raise some extra anticipations that you might be interested on deciding and adopting for your future works, because I am also a social science major, a college graduate, majored in politics and international relations, and trained at some very top summer schools. And of those special courses, I've also learned by fact that by 2050, there is a world anticipated perfect storm coming up. And by hearing of your brief facts about the natural disasters which happened in Singapore, Indonesia, and India, which were the countries that you mentioned, it came to more concern. What about, yeah, so my question would be, under the circumstances of changing submerges physics and raised up humidity, and for example, over the summer of 2018, there was some lowering of the Arctic mountains, melting down the ice, which is also the part of the climate change as global warming. So which type of future solutions do you have? And would you suggest?
Yes, good evening. So I'm just going to ask a question. I moved to New York from Santa Monica, California. What are your thoughts? Santa Monica, California, by the way, is leading a very, very strong environmental movement there, and it's spreading. New York is doing its part with our transit. What are your thoughts in terms of taking a much more local approach to a globalized movement? What I mean by that, in short, is the 8 years I spent in Santa Monica, California, it really, really went through a transformation. And so I would really love to hear from you as far as how going local can become going global. Thank you.
Thank you. One third question. Oh.
Hi. I have you mentioned in your talk the Germany becoming a reference point for Europe, and to be honest, I can't wait for this to happen because I was in France this summer. And as you know, the Minister of Ecological Transition slammed the door of the government. France is not going to meet its goal of carbon dioxide emission. So I know that you are talking from the perspective of a labor union, but what kind of condition do you see for countries that are very different from Germany, whose industry share in total output is not as high in Germany, where labor dialogue with management is not as harmonious as Germany? What condition do you see happening for the ecological transition to take place in Europe? This question. And my second question: you seem to be saying that for the transition to happen, it has to be just. And I'm a bit provocative, but I'm not sure that this is necessarily the case, because the argument of justice can be used by the other side. For example, in New York, the plastic industry has been very successful at defending plastic bags to oppose banning the plastic industry.
Thank you. Let the speaker first. I hope you answer the question about disaster. All right. So,
Do you want me to? I want to address the coal question
that
that
would
you
be nice. Yeah.
that you had mentioned. If you look at the U.S. statistics, the new jobs created in the energy sector, coal doesn't even figure in the conversation. It's renewables. That notwithstanding, the numbers speak for themselves, right? In India, which hardly had any solar 20 years ago, now they are rolling out several gigawatts of solar every month. The last auction, if I remember, was 4 cents per kilowatt hour. That's a public auction with 0 subsidies. So that coal doesn't even add up. So no matter what protection coal has, this is like the tough guy in the room, which has a lot of political protection and all. But at some point of time, the might of the market takes over. And in free markets, in most of the countries that don't have a command economy, and the market will take care of it. I have great belief in that, and that's happening already. But again, you need to nudge things in the right direction, and sometimes political patronage helps. The fact that France and India came together to set up the International Solar Alliance. What it does as an organization by itself is up for debate, but it has certainly driven the ambition in India, which by itself is 100 gigawatts of solar. That's what they're talking. So that itself adds up to quite a large percentage of the global added solar production in the last few years. So I think coal is on its way out. How soon is, of course, We can debate that, but I don't see how coal will survive the renewables tide. And so that's my perspective on coal.
Yeah, two comments. First, concerning local strategies. I think they are indispensable and they are necessary. We have to go much more local because if you go more local, it would become much more precise. And we have done a number of local projects in Germany, especially in the Ruhr area, because this area has been, over the last 3 decades, have undergone a huge transition process, which is not finished at all, because we have huge differences in unemployment rates. In a city, small city, you probably don't know, Duisburg, we have an unemployment rate of still nowadays of 12%, and only a few kilometers away, in Düsseldorf, we have an unemployment rate of 6%. So, and with structural policies at the regional level, I think I can be much more concrete and precise how this transition can be organized by intelligent infrastructure, by new concepts of mobility, to have more public transport and efficient public transport systems, concerning housing, to have much more energy efficiency housing programs, energetic renovation of old houses, etc. All this can be done only on a local level, identifying possibilities where you can make really progress concerning CO2 emissions, and establishing networks where people are working together to introduce and to implement such innovative projects. And I need the actors, locally, not only globally. But that leads me directly to your question, because it's not a contradiction. If I say we have to go local, at the same time, the whole process of transition has to be done at least at a European level. And Gesine Schwan is a good friend of mine from Germany. We are working very, very much together on those issues, because what is the problem of the European Union now? Only to mention 2 aspects. We are still in a deep economic crisis, which has to do with the concept of a monetary union we have introduced 15, 18 years ago. And this has the lessons we learned, for example, during the financial market crisis, that to overcome the crisis, politicians, especially driven also by the German government, based on austerity, which is nonsense. I think the alternative would be to have an ambitious investment strategy, a European-wide investment strategy, and to see, for example, also I'm criticizing the so-called Energiewende, the shift in energy policies in Germany, that this concept has been developed mainly from a national perspective, will not work. This must be done in a European perspective, and then I have European investment strategy, for example, for renewable energies, for energy, for intelligent networks, for energy transport, for joint efforts to store energy, which will be one big challenge for us in Europe. If it comes to renewable energies, if I'm be able to store them, that I can have the energy when it is needed. We can't do this at a national level. We have to do it at least on a European level. And that means also, as a trade unionist, making reference to the high share of industry in terms of GDP. We have a concept at the European level to increase industrial production, because industrial production is not only or the industry is not only producing the problems, we have to recognize that a modern industry is, how do we say it, is an enabling industry for a sustainable development. The steel industry, on the one hand, is quite energy intensive with high CO2 emissions. But I need steel if it comes to the wind industry, because I need all the wings, which I need steel. Without, I can't go ahead with wind energy. So to have an intelligent industrial policy, an investment strategy in addressing ecological challenges by creating at the same time decent jobs. It's not an illusion. It can be done, and we have made some progress, even if it goes not fast enough.
We still have a little bit of time, maybe questions more. Oh, good. There's a lady in the back.
Thank you. My question is more to Mr. Tripathi, and he made a mention of the sustainable initiative to divest agriculture from agrochemicals, I should say, in Uttar Pradesh. I wasn't sure that I might have heard something about what was the alternative. Is the alternative dealing with GMO seeds so that the seeds are much stronger and are able to fight disease? So that's my first question. And my second question is, in conjunction with this divestiture from agrochemicals, is there any component in the strategy to provide free and very accessible family planning? Not only the talk part of it, but the actual action of it, to primarily the women, but certainly also the men.
I'll make it very short. I was for Mr. Hoffmann. I was reading the news about new technology in Germany, hydrogen train, which was started operating about a couple of days ago, and which was built in France. So my question is, in terms of your corporate governance structure, which is completely different from the Anglo-American system, what's the role of the capital market or the stock market in terms of corporate governance, their relationships to the unions, and in terms of the venture capital environment there? Thank you.
I was wondering where the discussion was in India and Germany with regard to a carbon tax, and also an opportunity with government regulation shifting away from animal agriculture, which is so tough on the environment.
One question between Germany. He was a candidate for presidency in Germany. I was wondering if your view was as a big pilot. So is that something about the issues discussed here about Germany, is this wrong or right? So you want to make some comments, or yes?
Sorry, but this has been really a long discussion, and I arrived 1 hour late because I was on an migration congress here or conference here. But
this hangs together.
Yeah, of course, everything sticks together.
Migration and climate change.
One point which Reiner Hoffmann underlined is also very important for me. I mean, on the one hand, of course, you need pressure to find really an exit out of coal, etc. This is a political typical experience and a game. On the other hand, you have to negotiate it, because without negotiating, you can't really find, as Reiner said, a sustainable one. And it's very interesting. It's only during, I would say, during the last 1.5 years that the social sustainability of the exit has been more taken into account. We all the time we were very sure, and especially as the Greens have promoted that, and I am very often in love politically with the Greens, also being a social democrat, but very often the Greens have, of course, pleaded for that, but they don't very much depend on workers and trade union in their electorate. So it was very understandable that they did not underline that. But it is nowadays more and more a point, because you have to be concrete. Reiner Hoffmann spoke about the commission of the exit of the coal mines. We have mono-economical or mono-economic regions in Germany. This one important is in Eastern Germany, the Lausitz. And to find really not only a date when you would get out of coal, but a strategy which could be encouraging, which would really give a kind of prototype how to change structurally economy without losing large parts of the population. This is, for me, in my sense, the most important challenge. And we cannot, I think the risk to more and more alienate, is that right? Yeah.
Alienate, yeah.
I'm kind of tired. We have arrived. Nearly 2 o'clock in the morning now. I mean, alienate large parts of the population. We see what comes out of that. So it's also kind of trust, because of course also in Germany those who are primarily interested in climate change are very distrustful towards the trade unions. Reiner is still kind of believe there are other ones of the IG Chemie and others. Vassiliades, who is really kind of very much distanced by the typical green milieu, because he's very heavily arguing.
Evocative.
I have been re-elected with 98%. Well, you won't tell me something about how to deal with all that. So these are social problems. We have really to see that the sustainability is not just natural science stuff. It's not just typical climate, and it's also a social sustainability which has to be realized. Sorry, but maybe it has been too long. If one is tired, one gets long.
Thank you very much. So, those are good provocative questions. I think they have a chance now to respond to some of the aspects.
There is one specific question on the corporate governance structure and the role of venture capital markets. Certainly, there is a question how to finance it, and what kind of role financial markets or venture capital markets could play. But I'm not really an expert to give you an adequate answer to this. If it comes to the corporate governance system in Germany, I think one aspect I didn't mention, I didn't underline so clear, is that we have a corporate governance structure which is based on a two-tier system and not on a single-tier system. That means we have a board and a supervisory board in German companies. And then here again, the specific thing is that in companies with more than 2,000 employees, on the supervisory board, 50% are workers' representatives. And here again, I can make a link that in those boards, we are not only looking concerning the company strategies, that they are sustainable in making good profits, that they are also sustainable in taking into consideration not only shareholder value, taking into consideration stakeholder value. And stakeholder value means even more than only employees' interest, to have an interest in a medium and a long-term sustainable company strategy, which takes then also into consideration environmental challenges. And there is a huge difference in comparison to those companies with an entirely different corporate governance structure, without an involvement of workers, without co-determination, this is how we call it, concerning the company or the corporate strategies, which are, to my opinion, less sustainable as in the German model with workers' involvement and a clear say of workers, which is not only related to pay, not only related to jobs, but also related to the interests of other stakeholders in the region and concerning the environment.
Yeah, well, I want to address the questions the lady at the back mentioned, and you moved, so both of you. Let me try this. Can you hear me now? Yeah, good. So the agriculture that they're doing in Andhra Pradesh, it's not Uttar Pradesh, it's Andhra Pradesh. They call it zero budget natural farming. And zero budget, basically the farmer really doesn't have to buy, because if you've followed agriculture in India, this whole business of green revolution that started in the 60s and then scaled up ever since, it's all great, but the bottom line is that the entire landscape is more or less destroyed. And that cannot be sustained, especially if you have to forget the future population increases. The existing population is 1.3 billion. And the land is not going to get any more. I mean, it's the same resources. So you have to find more creative ways. They started it in 2015, and we've followed it with partnerships with some of the best institutions in the world. The World Agroforestry Center is undertaking very substantive research on the science, the scientific underpinnings of the process. I'll give you a small example. There has been 1,400 crop cutting experiments and soil testing experiments that have been carried out in the area that is already under cultivation. Globally, the standard is for healthy soil, it's about 70 earthworms per cubic meter of soil. And in most cases, we've seen about 120 earthworms, and in just 6 crop cycles. So what happens when it's 10, 20, 50? I would love to see what beneficial impacts will come out of it. This particular state is the second largest coastline in India, 900 kilometers, 962 kilometers to be precise, which is a significant coastline. Imagine what it does to the coastal ecosystem when you have currently several million tons of chemicals flowing through the rivers and the groundwater discharges into the ocean. When that stops, what happens to the ecosystem there? I don't have the answers, but I certainly know for a fact it will be beneficial to all the species. And now in terms of GMO and other things, the guiding principle of this form of agriculture is that everything has to be local. So the seeds are local, all the agricultural inputs are local. They use cow dung, cow urine, and 200 different botanical substances like aloe vera, neem, it's all plant substances that they make a puree of, and that's what. So it's basically treating the seed, treating the soil, and treating the plants. And that's in a simple form, that's what they do. I have a publication that we had commissioned the Council on Energy, Environment, and Water, which is one of the top 20 climate think tanks in the world with serious credibility. They have undertaken a publication for us. I just have one copy, but if any of you are interested, send me an email. I'll send you the electronic copy. What we found was that now the 17 SDGs, what is more popularly known as Sustainable Development Goals, has 169 targets. Now just this, if you implement this across the landscape, it has the potential of achieving about 25% of those targets, just one. And what else you could add to that, is up to our imagination. So happy to share the one hard copy that I have, but very happy to share the electronic copies later. And in terms of family planning, unfortunately for millennia, men have taken these decisions for women, right? So, but it all boils down to economic empowerment of women. In many parts of India where there are the non-governmental organizations that are working substantively in empowering women economically, the replacement fertility rate has been reached decades ago. When women have the power to make their decisions, there is no population explosion happening there. So it's more of a complex social problem. It's not a women problem.
Yeah, sure.
Women make the right decisions, and there's enough evidence to show that. So we are hoping that, especially with this particular project, which will empower at least, and our target is of the 6 million farmers, 3 million should be women, because these are mostly tenant farmers. So you don't have the ownership issue that if a woman is not the owner, how does she cultivate the land? Because it's tenant farmers, you can actually train people and encourage them to take to agriculture, and then you can actually bring in women farmers into this process. And Andhra Pradesh also is the state that has been at the forefront of the women self-help group movement in India. Within that state, they have 11.5 million women that are part of the formal self-help groups. And that's what is being now used to roll out this, because so there's a social architecture already in place where women are very well organized. So women are actually now teaching men how to organize into self-help groups, which is fascinating, to see. Thank you.
Well, I think we should stop here now. There's a nice thing at the new school, there's such a diversity of views, because the people come from different cultures, background, countries, and we had also very nice provocative questions from our journalists. So I want to thank particularly the SCEPA for organizing this event. In particular, Bridget Fischer and her team was very instrumental to get this going, and there's a lot of work behind this. So we want to thank them. We also want to thank, of course, speakers, Reiner Hoffmann and Satya Tripathi. I think it was a little bit adventurous, to so to speak, to bring the whole globe together in one session here. But I think we mastered this. I also want to thank Consul General David Gill and the Dean Milberg and Gold Towers from the other divisions. And in particular, I want to thank the Thyssen Foundation and also the German Embassy for support of these events. The climate talks that take place every semester here. And we are just thinking about the next topic. But this, I think, event was diverse and controversial enough that you will remember. Thank you for coming, and thank you for the speaker. Okay.